Scott Cawthon, he made a fucking Christian game and it was really shitty and it was ass. And then someone's like, this is really shitty and this is really ass. And he's like, you know what? Fuck you. I'm going to make a video game that's going to scare the bejeebies out of you. And you're going to like it. And then he did, and he was like, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. And then halfway through, while he was saying, I'm going to quit, he got an invoice from his latest, check. And you notice that he made $1 million that morning. That's the story of Scott Cawthon. He's not a bad writer, you know that? I've seen some of his Christian game stuff and his Christian movie. It's not that bad. His writing is pretty well done. It's pretty solid.
He must build his boat.
This is not a musical.
I must build my boat.
Say hello to the trapdoor.
It's just, I think the problem with FNAF, because I was mostly into FNAF stuff around the first trilogy, or maybe even the fourth game. Somewhere along the lines, Scott Cawthon kind of submitted and folded to the idea of what MatPat was writing. I think he was way too heavily influenced by MatPat's theories, and he started to write kind of towards what MatPat was implying, and it kind of swerved from there. To be fair, most of MatPat's stuff is taken from Reddit mostly. Well, okay, here's my unapologetic rant about MatPat. MatPat kind of changed the way people made YouTube content forever, in the sense that he started to make videos about video games that were beyond their design, but more about what they could be about. Now, here's the thing about MatPat's content. It's so old. It is so old. I think some of you forget how old MatPat's content is. He was making videos around 2010s, maybe in 2009. He was part of Screw Attack when that was still an actual channel that had coasted content. It is old content. So these new young bucks who are 20 years old, kind of never heard of MatPat before, but they know of him. So they look at his old content and they're like, what the hell? MatPat said, Luigi's got a huge fucking dick. That's crazy. His theories have always been stupid. No, MatPat just didn't take anything he did seriously at all. He just kind of coasted on the idea of just being silly and making theories on things that are vaguely true. Could Sonic the Hedgehog really run that fast? How fast really is Sonic the Hedgehog? And then he would hyper analyze on all this shit that of course doesn't make sense, but of course it wouldn't because it's a video game. But then he kind of overstepped his boundaries when it came to horror content, and that started with FNAF. He started to make theories on FNAF and whatever other horror game of the week was out that month, and they would be analyzed and scrutinized, and he'd be wrong maybe, or he'd be right sometimes. But what mattered was that he was gathering this info and he was presenting it. However, MatPat, because of how influential his videos were at that time, and even now, have now kind of steered the course of certain analog horrors / video games forever. And that, I feel that's the worst part about MatPat's content. And I understand that Film Theory is no longer being hosted by him, but I guess whatever, Game Theory, if you want to talk about Game Theory, Film Theory, whatever, his content it's damaged video game storytelling and analog horror storytelling forever, because now people are nervous about not living up to the expectations that these videos are now. And people, obviously there are a bunch of copycats that want to be like MatPat, and so they make their own theories and stuff. And so when he popularizes a certain series, a good example of this would be Welcome Home. Welcome Home is a good example of he made a video on Welcome Home and it was way too soon. Welcome Home was not done, and is still not done, and it barely even started at the time of its release. And yet when he made that video, it kind of created a paralysis moment for the person who wrote Welcome Home, and now they don't really want to write it anymore because they don't know if they can live up to that expectation. And it's kind of the same with pretty much any horror game he covers, or any analog horror he covers. It gives a little too much like attention to people who don't really want it that much. Because now everybody thinks they need to live up to the expectations of like being covered. Like there's some analog horror and online horror that just create their series just so they could be analyzed. There's some horror content that exists only for them to be like analyzed by other bigger horror content creators like myself, Matt Pat, Nick Nocturne, Nightmind. These people make these videos and series just so people like us could cover them. And it doesn't even, theory bait. Yeah, that's exactly it. It doesn't feel like anybody's making genuine horror content anymore. It just seems like people are making horror content just so other people can cover their horror content. It's weird now. Not hating on MatPat or anything, but he's such a fucking idiot sometimes. He's done a lot of damage on the indie community as a whole, honestly. Yes, exactly. I think he overstepped his boundary, and I will be unapologetic about that for as long as I live. I don't think analog horror is the thing he should be covering. I don't think analog horror should be mainstream at all. And I think, maybe this is coming from, like, my inner punk. I don't know, because, like, when I was a teenager, I just liked stuff that were underground and, like, unknown. But, man, I just don't think the mainstream can understand analog horror. At least, niche analog horror online. And whenever they try to understand it, it just kind of, like, destroys it. It just kind of destroys any sort of, like, interest that people have, because now that there's this new mainstream audience that expects so fucking much from this series, when in reality it's made by like a 16-year-old who thought it'd be cool if there was this video series about this Flash animated game, or like this video series about maybe the Backrooms, and it was made by like kids like who don't know anything about storytelling. And that's not to say that these are bad series. I'm very, very happy to see that young people are into horror and they're striving to make creative stuff again. That's cool. I'm always going to celebrate that. But to expect like a grandiose horror series out of these kids or like out of like anybody who's indie and never told a story before is just a lot of pressure, and a lot of them end up quitting or just don't want to, because there's like that interest is gone now. Now it just seems like people like their only purpose in making these now is just so that people can theorize on their series and not really move the story forward, because they have that insecurity that what if the ending comes and nobody likes it. See, there's just so much that MatPat and his team, I'm not going to put this all on MatPat, but MatPat and his team don't understand analog horror. They see scary thing and they connect the dots, but they don't understand the culture of it. They don't understand everything else surrounding it. The indie stuff, the celebration of it, the what it's all about. But they treat it as mainstream media, right? It's not called analog horror theory. It's not called ARG theory. It's called film theory. So they put it up to the standards as they would a movie or a TV show, when these shouldn't be put up to that fucking standard. It's weird. You give wings to these small projects, but they don't know how to fly. His audience is stupid. His audience is, made up of like 12-year-olds. But that's pretty much my entire thought process. I'm just like, I just don't like MatPat. And I'm not saying this as like a person. I'm sure he's a nice person. I'm sure he's never done anything wrong morally. I just think his approach to analog horror is damaging the horror community as a whole.